OTB in 10. Fantasy banter for the 4 or 6 people that still are watching this video. Welcome to Wild Card Weekend. It was, as we hoped it would be, a dramatic and exciting Week 13. It went all the way down to the final wire. In the closing minutes of Tuesday Night Football was when we finally determined what that playoff picture would be. It's now official. We'll get to it in a second. Let's reflect on Week 13. I'm joined, of course, by the league nemesis, Garcia, out on the West Coast. Garcia, what did you think of Week 13? What impressed, surprised, disappointed you the most?
I'm impressed by Shipwreck. He proved me wrong. I am disappointed in All Aboard the Baby Bus. He also proved me wrong. So that was actually the biggest surprise. My condolences to the like of regulators, Cincinnati, Gronk, joining our famous squad of, pathetic losers in the consolation bracket. This goes to show that your point system truly is something that actually carries merit now, because when I look at the win-loss records, I'd be disgusted to know the fact that teams with the 6-7 record are actually in the playoffs. It would be sacrilegious to think that actually is something that'd be allowed in even the real league. So I guess I'm going to lean towards keeping the point total system until I change my mind again in the next hour or so.
Yeah, pretty remarkable. We've had years where 8 teams have finished with winning records. And look, it's arbitrary, right? We've talked about it a million times. Win-loss records don't really tell the full picture. That said, we've had years, recently 2 years ago, we had 8 teams finish with a winning record. This year, we only had 4. I think my biggest takeaway is the takeaway I've had all year, which is, what is this narrative that we're still somewhat living outside of and still looking to determine? What is this narrative for Waivermen, right? They've had the bad beats all year. It continued again. PTT was able to put up good points, great points, and defeat them by a narrow margin, forcing them to now play in Wild Card Weekend. The team with the largest, with the most points in the league, now playing on Wild Card Weekend. Is this going to be a hero's journey story faced with endless obstacles they're able to push through and win that first ever championship? Or is this just the season of bad beats for them? I suppose we'll find out. We'll get to them in a second. But that, to me, was my big storyline from Week 13. So let's move to the playoff bracket. We said we'd get there. We're going to get there now. And a couple things we would love to point out. So here is how it finished. Shipwreck was your 3 seed, as it turns out. Wristbands, with a big week and the victory, is your 4 seed, moving up. Not only the 4 seed based in this bracket, they also finished 4th in total points with that big week. Waivermen and Greatest Show, as we had mentioned, they end up rounding out. They were in the point seed for most of the year. They end in the point seeds as well, even though it looked like they might have been able to peek through at the end. Sweet Home Chicago continues their dominance. They now, with the win last week, tied the OTB record set by many teams with 10 wins in a season. That is obviously the best that anyone in the league has ever done. Then PTT, as we had just mentioned, they are going to be your 2 seed. They get the week off. They're the Fairways Division winner. Remember the way the playoff bracket works. It's much like the NFL playoff structure. The teams don't feed into one side of the bracket or the other. The lowest remaining seed will play Sweet Home Chicago, and the highest remaining seed will play Fill the Thrill next week. So we'll get there when we need to get there. But we've got 2 very thrilling matchups here on Wild Card Weekend, interesting in their own right. So let's get straight to that, and we're going to start with Shipwreck versus Greatest Show on paper. This is an intriguing matchup, undoubtedly. Remember, these 2 teams met in the Super Bowl in 2018, and objectively, Shipwreck was the better team going into it. They had had some injuries down the stretch. You may remember that year they had Todd Gurley, who was like the RB1+++, was not playing by the end of the fantasy postseason. Or if they were playing in a very limited capacity. They were not the Todd Gurley that we had gotten used to. So that, plus a few other things, maybe made them a little more vulnerable going into that Super Bowl. Still, everyone saw them as the best team, and Greatest Show on paper said, "Hey, in our rookie year, in our inaugural season, we're going to shock the world," and they did. They won that title. Flash forward 2 years, Greatest Show on paper now looking to make a run in this stance, get themselves a 2nd title in just 3 seasons in OTB. Shipwreck, you know the story. They are the league leader in wins They are the league leader in amount of seasons that they've accumulated the most points in this league. Their resume, of course, has just about everything but the championship. But that one thing that we all strive for, that one thing that you can never take away. And so, Garcia, what do you think about this matchup? Before we get to picks, we'll get to picks. But what do you think of this matchup, Shipwreck versus Greatest Show on Paper? What are you looking for this week?
If I'm Shipwreck, I'm hoping for a second consecutive week of my 9 dynamic roster players to, surprise everybody. I question the Ryan Tannehill start over Matt Ryan because I don't think that LA Chargers defense is as good as the Jacksonville defense. I mean, though Jacksonville stinks right now, and they're kind of tanking for Lawrence, they still actually put a competitive effort, more so than I think even the Chargers these days are, as evidenced in last week's poor performance. If I'm Greatest Show on Paper, I'm glad that Justin Herbert's not facing the New England Patriots and Bill Belichick for a second consecutive week, and I'm more comfortable knowing the fact that I've got Mike Evans now in my starting lineup for the all-important playoff matchup. So I think it's going to be a highly contested. It's going to be too close to call when it comes down to, when Tuesday or Wednesday when the games are done of next week. But I'm certainly leaning to a team that, surprises me all season long. I didn't think they had that quality of a roster. I tried to find ways to maybe give them a piece to add to their roster, but they weren't taking it. I think it's going to come down to the fact that Greatest Show on Paper just has a little bit more talent than the one which Shipwreck has.
So to specify, are you picking Greatest Show on Paper in this matchup?
I am picking Greatest Show on Paper to beat Shipwreck. I'm positive I'll be, proven wrong a second week in a row by Shipwreck, rightfully so. But maybe this is what he needs. He needs me to not jinx him and let him get to that title matchup, and then I'll decide if I believe in the non-dynamic roster of players.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you this: if you want to look at the matchup, what's funny about any kind of graphics that we could possibly put up right now, it's one hand of poker, right? So all year we talk about who we think is the best for this and that, and we talk about 13 weeks of accumulated something, and really all that matters now is what you can do in 1 week. Players that get hot, players that get cold, bad lucks, or good luck that is, or bad beats. I mean, this is just 1 week now, so a lot can happen. If you look at it, it certainly looks as if Greatest Show on Paper is the stronger team. They've been the strongest team all year. Kind of reminds me of where we were in 2018, though, because Greatest Show on Paper, they've got some vulnerability on the bottom half of that lineup. It's not to say that they can't supplement it, but it looks like we're probably not going to see Antonio Gibson, who was coming on strong, at least as at time of video recording. It doesn't look good for his chances to play next week. DeAndre Swift is another one that I don't know where we're at. It's actually kind of a sad story that since that concussion, there seems to be something going on with him that is not allowing him to get back, which is just too bad. And now you look at the lineup without those two players, and it starts to look a little even. You look at matchups on both sides. Both have really good quarterback matchups. Again, we don't know exactly what they're going to end up doing, but right now, if you look at the way the lineups are set, both have intriguing matchups up and down the roster. I mean, Aaron Jones has a very compelling matchup, undoubtedly, this week. But again, I mean, I think that because Greatest Show on Paper has a few more injuries, I'm not sure how they will supplement. And this may be a little bit of recency bias because I just saw Shipwreck's team put up great points in Week 13. I'm going to pick Shipwreck. I'm going to stick to what I've been doing, just as you had been sticking on Greatest Show on Paper for weeks, whether good or bad. It seems like you've been attached to them. I will remain attached to Ship. I said at 5-5, I thought this team had a great chance to get in. They took care of business, and I think they will figure it out, get on and out of Wild Card Weekend, and live to see another week. That's my pick anyway.
I mean, how heartbreaking it would be for the other teams to know that there's PTT and Greatest Show on Paper who have titles already hanging in their stadium with the opportunity to win a second before these other 4 teams have a chance to win their first. So there's a lot of pressure on those other 4 as opposed to PTT and Greatest Show on Paper. Being that they've been there, they know what it takes. So
yeah, good point. Because again, something I should have brought out on that bracket. Only 2 teams have won titles in this bracket. We'll get to the divisional contenders probably more so next week, but just putting this graphic up one more time. Remember, PTT was your 2014 Super Bowl winner. Greatest Show on Paper, your 2018 Super Bowl winner. Sweet Home Chicago, we well know they've been making their run. They didn't get there. They fell just short last year. This year, it looks like they are poised to do it. We'll get to them next week. But what about Shipwreck? What about Waivermen? Two clubs that have been there again and again. Can they break through? And for as much as we haven't talked much about wristbands lately, let's move on to another intriguing wildcard weekend matchup. So, after all of what we were talking about with WB, the strong start, the 5-1 start, they only go 2-5 down the stretch, but they do enough to get in. They get into the dance. They finish the season with their second consecutive. They finish the year with their second consecutive winning season. They are an interesting a matchup this week for a Waivermen club that, as we said, had been through this again and again. Another bad beat in Week 13. They have to play on wildcard weekend now. I don't know who they would have rather seen or not seen. You could argue it a bunch of different ways. I will say, you look at this WB team. This team put up 73 points 2 weeks ago. They put up 130 points or something like that this week. They seem like that kind of team. And to me, that's kind of a team I don't really particularly care to play because they have shown they can put up big points. Garcia, what are you looking for in this matchup between Waivermen and Wristbands?
I'm looking for Derrick Henry to show up because that was not what you wanted in a very critical playoff deciding game, so to speak, with Waivermen last week. So, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, the man had 50 points before the end of the first half. So, is Derrick Henry going to show up like he's had most of the season, or is he going to have another dud? Because if that's the case, Waivermen is in a heap of trouble. But, his opponent also has Baker Mayfield as a starting quarterback currently on the roster. Not sure if that's the best matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. But, Wristbands, again, continuously surprises us. Whether we want to believe it or not, he just seems to be doing something right, if that's really him who's doing it. There is rumors of a league investigation that he might be using some foreign services to help him, which, as you know, is a no-no in our league. You make the decisions, you stand by them, you don't need outside assistance. Lord knows I need more outside assistance, considering the fact that now Wristbands for the second year in a row is making the playoffs, and I, of course, am not. So that's an issue. But I like Waivermen. I had liked Waivermen all season long. I'm glad he got rid of Chris Mims on the roster last week. I assume he'll do the same this week. Any jet is not a good thing. But my money's on Waivermen. I see him propelling it to the big semifinal matchup.
I think, again, it's an interesting matchup, and, both teams are strong. Waivermen obviously has shown more consistent strength than WB had, but WB had that strong start. They had that kind of murky middle. We talked about this a little bit last week, right? They've got a heavy receiver-focused lineup. That tends to make it a little more volatile because we've talked about the ways that targets seem to come and go for receivers week to week. You never know for sure. But could they get a big week? Now, I'll tell you something you gotta like about Waivermen mostly, and a little bit WB, which is that the Seahawks play those New York Jets this week. So you would think that Seattle, with Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf, you would think that would be a compelling matchup. Granted, that also means that Tyler Lockett, who is a WB player, is also potentially poised to break out, and that could be interesting, an interesting dynamic. The one thing I don't love, not to say that his entire team is Los Angeles Rams, but again, at time of recording, Cooper Kupp and Darrell Henderson look like they'll be in his lineup. The Patriots aren't the Patriots of yesteryear. That said, seeing what they did on Sunday, knowing what they're able to usually do on short weeks, I don't really love sending two of my fantasy superstars into a matchup, or 1.5 of my fantasy superstars into a matchup against the New England Patriots. Not saying that you necessarily have much of a choice to change that, but that's something maybe to look out for what ends up happening on Thursday night. This is a tough one. I
gotta keep in mind though, Russell Wilson I think has had the most turnovers of all quarterbacks in the last 4 or 5 weeks, so that's a little alarming too. So maybe they go to the ground game, which could take away from the weapons of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. But it is the Jets, so at this point, just throw the ball wherever you want. You'll likely get a score.
It's a fair point. You don't know. Again, 1 week, right? We don't know what we'll see in 1 week's time. That said, I look at Waivermen, I see a team that's been the strongest team, one of the strongest teams in OTB all year, and I look at the matchups they have this week, and I like them almost all up and down the lineup right now. So I'm going to stick with the chalk pick for this one. I'm going to pick Waivermen. I think they will get it done. And then look, after all of the conversations that we have about the bye week and this and that, look, right now it's the biggest issue, right? Like you go into wildcard weekend, having had a chance at a bye week, and you're so frustrated, right? Because you're like, this was my opportunity. Now I have to play this game. That's literally, potentially, hopefully, positively, a distant memory by this time next week. Because all you got to do is win that week, and then boom, you are at equal footing for the rest of the year in your Final Four bid with everybody else. So if Waivermen can just get through that, they will still be in the place that they wanted to be all year long, which is the Final Four. This is an interesting game. I think it's a close one. I said I will pick Waivermen. I will pick Waivermen, but I do think it's close. I think it's close.
Well, it sounds like we're different in one game and similar in the other. I, of course, am choosing the teams that had higher points and finished with a 6-7 record. So that tells you where my loyalty lies.
It's not about loyalty per se. It's just making picks. But don't forget, as we bring this to a close, and again, wish the Wildcard Weekend Warriors best of luck this week. Don't forget your consolation bracket. Don't have graphics for it, none of that. But remember to keep playing. Actually, I've got two pieces of information. First one is that consolation bracket, remember, 4 ping pong balls will be given to the winner, aka you are increasing your chances by double than the best next team in the lottery selection for draft night. And that can be a big deal. I think. I mean, it depends what you want out of the draft board, but remember to keep playing. Remember to keep setting those lineups. If you are Sweet Home Chicago and you are PTT, and you watched this entire video when you knew that it was going to be very little about you, and you're still watching now, well, guess what? I'm going to give you something 16 minutes in that will make you maybe happy to watch something. Here's a little known tip that a lot of people don't know, that teams that have been in the Final Four, at some amount of time have had experience with this. Do not set a lineup this week. That is your tip for the week. Because in your effort to just set a lineup, which would just obviously give you, a chance to see how your points would be, which are completely meaningless and won't go anywhere. If a player gets hurt, if a player has something happen to them or something else, if you set a lineup, that player's locked. You can't do anything to that player throughout the weekend that you would normally be able to do if you didn't set a lineup. So your actually best advice that I can give you, don't set a lineup this week. Vacate the entire starting lineup section. That is another advantage of being a Final Four team, is that if something weird happens this week because of COVID or concussion or injuries or whatever, you can immediately pivot from that player and you won't have to wait next week in waivers. Just make sure they're not in a starting lineup. Garcia, final thoughts as we head into Wildcard Weekend.
The fact that you just shared that with all of us, I guess 3 or 4 of us, whoever's watching, it in some ways you should know from experience of this season, because it seems like based on your point totals these last few weeks, even in the middle of the season before you were able to pull out that hoodwink of a trade, you too probably had the same thing of where you just didn't have any players on your active roster. So that would explain some of your pitiful performances. I think when it's all said and done, this has to be one of your worst seasons. Not only losing twice to me, potentially a third time on the horizon if I advance in this consolation bracket. But one has to wonder, have you lost that touch that you had going so much in the first 8 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of people, I've had this conversation with a few different league members the last couple of days. A lot of people have very low thresholds they don't want to not be able to stand out, right? Like they want to just meld into the pack. So you've got a mediocre team that isn't going to get very far. The odds are that you're probably going to just stay with it. You're not going to take a lot of chances. You don't want to embarrass yourself, right? So you just stay with what has bbeen somewhat working for you. You pick up your 90 to 105 a week. You get some wins, you get some losses. You end the year 5-8, 6-7, whatever it is. 7-6 maybe with some bad points. Maybe you sneak into the playoffs and lose in the first round. Look, I've always said it. I am out to win every single season. I will do what it takes to win every single season. If that means that staring at a situation when I was 2-2, knowing that the decisions I was about to make was going to be volatile, it's a pull the goalie situation, right? You're down 2-1. You should pull the goalie with about 7 minutes to go in an NHL game. Most coaches won't pull that goalie until 90 seconds. Why? Because even though the data says this is your best chance to win the game, they don't want to look bad. Because pulling the goalie will increase the volatility of goals scored. They could lose 8-1, and they could have people criticizing and making fun of them for losing 8-1. Luckily for me, the Shield's strong. It doesn't matter to me. I'm out there to win. And if I, look bad in the process of doing what it takes, that was what I did to put my best possible team out on the field in an effort to be a championship contender, not to be an effort of an also-ran. So that was what I decided to do this year, and obviously, it speaks for what I was able to do with it.
You come up with every flippant excuse possible. I just admit it. You were bad this year. You took chances. You thought you were the smartest guy in the room, and you weren't.
Now, look, I'll tell you this right now. Jonathan Taylor and J.K. Dobbins will be stars in this league. All right, put it down on the record books now. If I figure that out before
they're stars for the league, but they weren't stars this year.
They weren't. I'm sorry that I figured that out before them. That's not my fault that I figured that out. They'll be stars next year. I did this many times. I picked David Johnson.
So we can lock them into your roster next year.
I'm not saying that I will lock them into my roster.
This was a keeper, would you have kept them both on your roster?
I would have, yes, 100% if it was a
so that's a vote for a keeper league. So we've got now 2 yeses.
Okay, I wouldn't go that far.
That's clear that you're on the keeper league train.
I will say this. I it's funny because you're like, now that he's not on my roster, am I rooting one way or the other? I would love nothing more than Jonathan Taylor to blow up in the playoffs and give Waivermen that last big next surge to get them over the hump, because Jonathan Taylor's got a very compelling end of season schedule. When you make that trade, if you're Carl, you sit there and say, I know it's not looking good right now, but look at the schedule at the end of the season. I know the talent. I've seen this guy. I know that he can figure this out. And so you take that chance. And you know what, Carl? I hope it works out, because it should work out. I hope Jonathan Taylor is the league winner that we all thought he was going to be earlier in the year. I hope he's the league winner for you in the playoffs. I really do. That's Garcia. This is Sidebar. It's a good thing because my battery's about to die. We will see you next week. Best of luck to the wildcard weekend Warriors. We will see you for the Final Four in OTB in 10 next week.